This video will show you the sample solutions for task 2. In task 2, we'll add in the PHP codes to connect to the database and store the new records for member. Before you start writing the code, remember to copy all the files from your previous lab exercise JavaJam 6 into a new folder called JavaJam 7. And to execute the PHP codes, you have to store it in htdocs in the gem. And to configure the config file and write the codes to connect to the database, you need to create a new PHP file and name it as config.php. For this, for task 2, you need to set up database, and you can refer to javajam.sql file provided to you. Later, I will demonstrate to you how to set up the database in case if you are still not sure how to do it. We need to create a new database called JavaJam, create a new table called members, and we also need to create a new user with the username user with the password user pwd. So these are the three things you need to set up in the MySQL. In the config file, we need to write the PHP code using MySQLi statements to connect to the database and handle the connection errors. Database information, the host name, we use the localhost. Database name, JavaJam. This is the user that will be given access to this. So in phpMyAdmin, we have to give the privilege to this new user. So when the user, for the process sign up page, you need to modify the PHP codes. First thing, you have to remove the codes that you have write in the previous lab, which is using PHP file functions to store the new member record. And you also need to remove the code that asks you to redirect to profile page, because in the next lab, we will do login, and after login, then only can go to profile page, because login we will include the session codes in order to only give the users who have logged into the system to access the profile page. Profile page can only be accessed by a user who have logged in, and we will create a sessions for each user. So this will be excluded in this lab. So this lab we focus on how to write codes to add new members into database, into JavaJam database. And in the code also, you need to validate whether the account already exists or not. We will check this using the email address. We will check whether the email already exists or not. If the email already exists in the members table, we will prompt a message to inform the user the registration is filled because the email already exists, and we can provide them two navigation links, sign up and log in. If the registration is successful, we will write PHP codes to insert a new record into JavaJam database and execute the insert SQL statement. So this one I want you to write using the prepared statements and bound parameters in MySQLi. So this is for you to practice how to write codes using prepared statements. To inform the users that the registration is successful, you also need to print a message to inform them registration is successful and give them a link to navigate to login page. Lastly, we also need to have a code to free the resources and close the database connection. Okay, now I will, before I show you how to set up database, I just demonstrate to you how the system should work. So this is the sign up page. So in the sign up page, we have name, email, and password. And this is the database that I already set up earlier with members table, JavaJam database with a table called members, which consists of 4 attributes. User ID is the primary key, which will be auto increment. And we have name, email, password submitted by the user when they sign up as a JavaJam member. Okay, now I will sign up a new account. User sign up a new account. Click sign up button if if it is successful, you will show registration successful to the user and provide a login link. And now you check the database, if you refresh the database table, a new record has been added successfully. Now, if I try to sign up an account again using the same email address, we need to write a validation code to check whether this account exists or not by checking the email, whether this email already been registered as a member before or not. When I click sign up button, the PHP code will do the checking on from the database to check whether inkia@um.edu.my already exists or not. Since it already exists in the members table, we will not allow the users to register again, and we will show this error message to the user to inform the user that the email already exists. So they need to either log in using the existing account, or they can sign up again. So this is what you're supposed to do for this lab. Now I will go through the steps. So first thing, we will set up the database. In the lab exercise, I have provided you a JavaJam.sql file. You need to create a new database called JavaJam. I will drop the database to demonstrate to you how to create a new table. So now I will drop this table. So I will come to operations. You can click operations, and this will allow you to do some operations like rename the table, create a new table, create the table, rename database, remove database. So now I come to remove database under the operations and click the drop the database to drop the entire database from phpMyAdmin. Now this database has been removed. For user accounts, and previously I already created a new user account, but now I will remove it. The user accounts that we are using in the system is user, and now I will remove this user as well. I will remove the selected user. You can click this. If you scroll down, there is an option for us to remove the selected user account. You have to select first, then click go. It will allow you to remove the selected user's account. Okay, so now both database and user accounts has been removed by me, and we want to create a new database. You can click the database tab again and create a new database called JavaJam. Click create. Now a new database has been created. To save your time, you can straight away copy this SQL statement to create a new table called members. So we will have a user ID which is auto increment and used as a primary key. And we also have name, email, and password, these three attributes. Now I copy this, and you can come to console, paste it, press Ctrl Enter to execute query. Now a new table called members has been created. Okay, so if after we have created the tables, right now I need to create a new user. For you to create a new user, you can come to privileges, and you can scroll down to come to new tab and choose add user, and I want you to use the new user with the name user, database password user pwd. Username is user. You can choose any host or local. So now if I choose localhost, it will automatically show this is the host name is localhost. Password user pwd. Okay, You can choose to grant all privileges on this database only. If you, let's say you want to give this user global access, then you also can click chat all here. If you only want to give database specific access only to this user can only have all the privileges on this database only and not other database, then you don't need to click this. So if you only want to give this user to access this database, you click here and click go. Now we can see that we have created a new user account called user, and this user has access to JavaJam database. So if you click user accounts again, you can see the new user has been created. And if you compare to other accounts, right, this one, they call it user because the usage instead of all privileges, because I didn't set this as a global privileges. So if you click edit privileges, you can see that, and click database, you can see that this user has been given the database specific privileges only. And the database is JavaJam. If you want to give access to other database, you can click the database name and click go, and the access will be given. Okay, now we come back to JavaJam. So now we already set up the database, and also we already have a user account that have created the user account that and give the database specific privileges to access JavaJam. Now we already set up the database part. Next, we go to config.php. For in this question, I asked you to use MySQL API. You can write it using object-oriented approach, or you can also write it using the procedural way. So for MySQL, there are two ways that you can write the code. You can use object-oriented. If object-oriented, that means that you are going to create a new object. If procedural, you will call this function MySQL connect and pass in the for database. So these are the two ways that you can write it. So when you search for information, right? For example, if you look at the example in W3 schools, normally they will show you sample codes for three methods. One is MySQL object-oriented approach. Another one is a sample codes to write the PHP codes in MySQL procedural. Another one is write the codes using the PDO API. So there are three ways that you can have database connection. For this example in the config file, I've written it using the object-oriented approach. For MySQL, we need these four informations. So I define four variables to store the information: the host name, localhost, database name, JavaJam, username, user, password, user PWD. So this is the information, database information. When we apply object-oriented approach, we have to use the new MySQL to create a new MySQL object. And this is a variables that I've defined for this new object. We pass in the four informations to create a new connection object. So this name, you have to remember this name because we will be using it to execute the query later. So we need to remember when we have to reuse it to close the connections and also to execute the query. So you have to remember the name that you have defined in the config file. For to step 2, we need to handle the connection error. So for MySQL, if you write it using object-oriented approach, you will call this function connect error to capture the error code. And the die method is equivalent to exit. So if there is any error that we found, if we manage to catch any error, we will exit from the program and also inform the user connection failed and also shows the connect error so that the user know what's going on. So this is the sample for code that written using the object-oriented approach. Now we come to the when the user click the sign up button, the information, the new user information, the name, email, password, and repeat password will be sent to the process sign up the PHP for further processing, and the data will be submitted to backend using the post HTTP post method. When we come to process sign up, this is the part that we are going to do modification. So remember, before you write the database files, you remove the files that originally you used to do the file handling, and also remove the code which will redirect to the profile PHP. Before in the PHP code, so this is the PHP code that we will modify to include the database code. First, include the config file. So this one, the config file, I have stored it in my includes folder. I have created a folder called includes to store my config.php. So that's why I also indicate the folder name here. So this is, we have to include the config file using the include once method. This part is same as the previous one, no different. This is the same code. So now we have to add in the codes for step 3 and step 4. To create, before we insert the new records, the first thing that we want to do is we want to validate the member exists or not. To check whether the member exists or not, I write a SQL statement, which is a select statement to select email from the members table, where email equals to the email. So if you check, this is the email that has been passed from the sign up.php. We want to check whether this account exists or not. So what we will do is we will use a select statement to check whether this exists or not. And we will for these connections, this is we will use the query functions to execute, because this is object-oriented approach. So we will use it. You remember, this is a connection object. So we will call the query functions to execute this query, and we store the result here. For us to check whether the account exists or not, we use the num rows. Okay, this will help us to get the number of rows in a result. So if it is greater than or equals to 1, just in case if let's say there are some database issues, there might be more than one record exists. So it's safer for us to use this in our if else statement. If it shows that there is a record here, because this will return that how many records we have received. So the num rows will allow us to do this. So if we have detect that there is at least one record in the database, we will prevent the user to create a new account. So we will execute this part of code to inform user email already exists and give them 2 navigation ring, sign up and log in. Else, if the number of rows equals to 0, that means the account has not been created before. We will proceed to this part. And in the instruction, I ask you to practice to write it using the prepare statement. So you need to use the you need to follow the 3 subset: prepare, bind, and execute. If you are writing it using prepare statement, first you have to define a new variable to store the statements, the prepared statement. So in this code, I have defined a variable called stmt. So to store the prepared statement, first you have to call the prepare functions. The prepare function, right, you have to pass in the SQL statement. So you can see that in prepared statement, right, instead of putting the variables in, we will use the placeholder. Then after that, only bind the parameters. So first thing, prepare the statement. Then we bind the parameter. So we can see there are 3 attributes that we are going to insert the values. So these three parameters, they are string type. So I use S. And this is the variable name that we have used to store the input from the submitted from the signup.php. So we already store it in this variable. So we bind these 3 variables using the bind param function. Next, we will execute the prepared statement by calling this execute function. So after we have executed the statement and we want to process the result, we echo this message to the user to inform the user that the registration is successful, and we also provide a the login link to so that the user can log into the system. And lastly, you have to close the statement. So at the end, we also need to free the resources and close the connection using MySQLi. So we can call the close connection function to close it. So this is a very simple exercise for you to learn how to validate whether the account exists or not, and also insert a new record. If the account exists, we prevent the user. So we can use the new themes here is we do the validation. So we can use to check whether the account exists or not. You use the select statement to check whether this email exists or not, and we use the num_rows function to check how many number of rows that we have retrieved when we execute the query. So the result we store in this variable, and we use the num_rows to check how many records we have found, how many rows of records. If more than or equals to 1, that means there is at least 1 record in the database table. We will not continue the execution to insert the new record. So if not exists, then we proceed to this part. And lastly, don't forget to close the connection. Okay, so this is the demonstration for task 2. If you have anything not clear, you can send an email to clarify, or send me a message in Teams to ask me specific questions.